Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Friday, the 10th of September, for what we hope will be a fantastic webinar. My name is Dr. Michelle Maloney. I'm one of the co-founders of the New Economy Network Australia, or one of the co-hosts today for our webinar. This webinar is part of an important series called Reimagining Quality of Life and Social Wellbeing. And as you can see from the lovely flyer, we have three remarkable speakers today. Professor Noam Chomsky, Associate Professor Ariel Salleh, and Professor Gar Alperovitz. Before we invite our speakers to join us, we just want to share some information about the work that we've been doing and what has brought us here to host this webinar. And my colleague Hamed will in a moment also acknowledge that this is part of Social Sciences Week. First of all, it's a tradition in Australia to acknowledge country. This has been a great privilege of mine to live, work and play in a beautiful part of the world called Brisbane, here in Queensland, Australia. I'd like to acknowledge the elders past, present and emerging of the Yagara Turrbal peoples on whose land I am lucky enough to be on. Always want to acknowledge that the land was never ceded, sovereignty continues. This is and always will be Aboriginal land. And I'd like to invite all of you who haven't already, but if you'd like to, pop into the chat box where you are and whose country you're on. It's been really amazing to see over the last 10 years a greater heightened recognition by non-Indigenous people of the First Peoples of this country. I also like to acknowledge the ongoing legacies of colonial invasion and the ongoing impacts of colonial governance on this continent, and make a personal commitment always to love country and try to act in solidarity with others at every step. And one of the founding principles of the New Economy Network Australia and other groups I'm part of is decolonising our minds and hearts to make sure that we're really here, connected to this place and respecting the First Peoples. We will not have time for everyone today to acknowledge country. So if you could just write that in your chat, feel it in your heart, think about the plants and the animals who live here with you, then I think that would be a beautiful recognition of country. So today's webinar, Post-Capitalist Visions of Quality of Life. Our guest speakers, Noam Chomsky, Gar Alperovitz, and Ariel Salleh. In a moment, I'll hand over to Hamed to talk about reimagining quality of life. But first, I'd just like to mention, for those of you who may not be familiar with this network, the New Economy Network Australia, or NENA, as we affectionately call her. NENA was formed about 5 years ago by a group of folks really concerned about the absence of debate and discussion about the economy in Australian society. NENA has grown into a really fantastic network, thousands and thousands of people, and I think we're up to about 600 people as paid members of this cooperative. If you visit the website, you'll be aware that we are a network of individuals and organisations working to transform Australia's economy to achieve ecological health and social justice. We have a distributed governance network, meaning there are lots of little hubs working on lots of different things, and all we ask is for people to come and share their own knowledge and wisdom into the network, because we're a lot stronger together. I'll hand over now to Hamed to introduce the University of Newcastle and the shared project that he's been working so hard on with NENA and with his colleagues. Thanks, Hamed.
Thank you, Michelle, for the very lovely introduction. This is Hamed Hosseini, and I too would like to welcome you on behalf of my team, and also welcome our great speakers. We're still, I believe, waiting for Noam and Gar to get connected from the United States. Unfortunately, we don't have a hotline to contact them to see what's going on, but we can have this introduction. I too would like also to thank the team behind this, especially Michelle, the director of the NENA and the NENA team, and especially Rhiannon Hardwick for their very great efforts, tireless efforts that have been behind the webinar series that we are offering. And this is the fourth webinar out of the monthly webinar series. Every month we have different topics, and if you allow me to share my screen a little bit, Yeah, okay, I skipped the acknowledgement, yes, this webinar series, this is the fourth one that we do in partnership with NENA on monthly basis on different topics, but they all address the issue of quality of life. We invite many activists, intellectuals, and academics from a diverse range of perspectives and experiences to present and discuss their alternative visions about quality of life. And as Michelle said, this is also being offered as part of our contribution, the university side's contribution to the Social Science Week this year. Just very briefly about the project. Again, the webinar series is just one of the elements of a bigger project that we run here, in partnership with NENA. It's called the Reimagining Quality of Life, that aims to play an important part in articulating, connecting, and strengthening the remarkable transformative work being carried out by the people and organized across the emerging ecosystem of transformative actors in Australia. Funded by the College of Human and Social Futures from the University of Newcastle, the project, through its current national survey, aims to build a participatory platform and process leading to a unifying picture of initiatives, ideas, movements, and networks that offer viable alternatives to the faltering status quo, and to present this as a compelling case for wider coordination and support by all stakeholders. Their ultimate goal is to give greater voice to the grassroots and community organizations in reshaping public debates and policies in quality of life. For those who are interested, I would like to invite, because we don't have much time, to invite you to have a look at some of our websites and web pages. Alternative Futures Research Hub, which is created and established as a community partnered research hub together with NENA. Also, if you're more interested in knowing about the project, there is a web page on Well Living Lab on the university's website, University of Newcastle's website, and you can also see the list of our lovely participants and members. Also, we run a website outside the university basis called The Common Alternatives, that you can subscribe to get the news and also the publications of the members. And it includes a much broader network of people, international network of people, and it's dedicated to studying alternatives to capitalism, to neoliberalism, and also giving them more visibility to the public. And in the end, I will share with you a link to a survey, because we don't want just to be the only speakers. We also would like to hear from you about your views on quality of life, how a good quality of life actually should be defined, especially in our current condition. And also after this, we will send you an email, hopefully with a link to the recording of the event, and also a link to the survey. And we would like to invite you to answer this question, so we can also hear from you and your views. Thank you so much. Back to you, Michelle.
Thank you, Hamed. So we've got ourselves in an uncomfortable situation where our two US speakers are not actually here yet. So this is the vagaries of Zoom life. What I might do, and I hope it doesn't make her too uncomfortable, Ariel, if you feel you could give a kind of introduction to what you thought Noam and Gar were going to talk about, and then give your talk, because I know that you had structured yourself to go third. If you could be so flexible and delightful, we'd be very, very grateful to you. And what I'm hoping is that perhaps Gar and Noam, despite very confirmed and very knowing the time, might have got the time wrong and might join us shortly. And if they don't, we have to brace ourselves for that disappointment. But here at NENA, we are nothing if not flexible and groovy, and we would make sure that we have another equally awesome event. But let's just see how this morning rolls out. Ariel, would you be so lovely as to agree to give your talk now? Is that okay?
Sure. Okay.
Thank you. 3 cheers for Ariel for being so wonderful. Thank you, darling.
So greetings all from from the, now big sign, oh, there you are, okay, it's okay. From the Antipodes, greetings all, and I acknowledge I'm speaking to you from the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, acknowledge their elders and the fact that the land was never ceded. I anticipated that the boys would talk about, would give us socialist solutions, and I see my presentation as, in a way, post-socialist. So it's a little bit difficult situation to give the reorganization. But anyway, let's go for it. Over the past several decades, as a sociologist, I've been looking at how to join the four key movements: ecology, workers, Indigenous, and women's movements. And I sort of fell into this. I fell into it as an activist in about 1976, when it happened in Australia that there were a lot of moves to mine uranium on Indigenous land. And myself, with a couple of other women, we set up the movement against uranium mining. And in that movement process, we of course worked alongside the unions and the churches, the mums and dads. We tried to, and Indigenous peoples, of course, we tried to make it as big a broader movement as possible. So this was my first activist learning. About 1980, I had a sabbatical in the UK, and I got tangled up with the women of Greenham Common, who were protesting the situation of US missile base there in Britain. And this was entirely a feminist action. Back in Australia in '85, I got active with some locals around Leichhardt to form a local Green Party. And by '89, I was in the States talking with Jim O'Connor about the possibility of getting a journal up called Capitalism, Nature, Socialism, which would have an integrative function. And it does today, and it still thrives. So that was, after those experiences, I realized there were tensions between the movements. There were competing political objectives. And there had to be a bottom line. There had to be a way to synthesize this. And it seemed to me that ecological feminism could do this. So that's what I'm going to try and explain to you now. And at the same time, I might say in 1981, 1986, 1989, very impressive, what I will call classic ecofeminist books were published. Carolyn Merchant, The Death of Nature. She was a historian of science, and she analyzed the sex gendering of the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution. Maria Mies in Germany, Merchant was in the US, Mies in Germany, took a world systems analysis, basically, of women's position in colonial states. Vandana Shiva in India, an ecologist, spelled out the specific role and knowledges that women have as they work largely in rural settings, farming and livelihoods. And that I would still say that even today, what are we, 40 years later or so, these are the best books on ecological feminism because they offer a materialist analysis. And I'll try to explain a little bit more what that means in a minute. So these days, when I'm writing, and I'm on a new book at the moment, I tend to use the term, for the agent of history that's giving us such a bad time, I use the term capitalist patriarchal imperium. Okay, so that sort of covers the socialist aspect, the feminist aspect, and the decolonial focus. And of course, the bottom line for each of these movements is the ecology movement. This is where the synthesis has to be, because this is the ultimately without you know, a planetary well-being, none of us exist, let alone do politics. So we're leaving behind single issue politics of socialism or feminism or decolonial. And we're looking at them as historically nested frames. So we're looking at them as having evolved one out of the other, and each interdependent, interlocking with flows between them. Now, how does this work? Well, to start with, the socialist one, which is the most well-known, Marx with his notion of primitive accumulation, which is for example, the enclosure movement, the destabilization of peasant communities from their land in order to accumulate, gain that land and turn it to profitable means, and at the same time creating a working class that displays people. And of course, Rosa Luxemburg extended this beautifully by around about 1913 in Germany. She looked at the necessity, the absolute necessity of colonization for the functioning of capitalism. And the colonies provide labor, they provide resources, and ultimately they provide markets. So the interlink between capitalism and colonization is well known and well understood. But the interlink with feminism is not so well known. It's beginning to be understood that domestic labor, in household labor, reproductive labor, constitutes an essential part of the capitalist system. In fact, there were feminists back in 1972, and I'm thinking of Rosa Maria Dalla Costa, who even argued that women's domestic labor, by subsidizing the worker, subsidizes the very production of surplus value in the capitalist system. So she saw a kind of chain of value production, and in that way integrated women's work, which had been excluded from the regular socialist analysis. That book, pathbreaking book of hers, was 1972. But I want to draw your attention to another European woman, Hilkka Pietilä, who's from Finland, who was a UN feminist activist. And perhaps, Michelle, you could show the image of Hilkka's work. Hilkka already had hit on the essential role of women's reproductive labor. And in this diagram, I can't see the diagram, but is it showing?
I'm just bringing it up now, Ariel.
Okay.
Having issues with my buttons today. There we go. Hang on.
I still can't see it.
That one?
There we are. Yes.
Hurrah.
Yes. Okay.
Something's working today.
Don't worry about the descriptions. The basic idea is to see the image and to grasp the dynamism that Hilkka had picked out. And of course, she sees the household economy as the reproductive economy as absolutely primary and essential to the secondary one, which she calls the domestic economy, which is more or less the state sector, which is providing economic services like education and health and infrastructure and so forth. And of course, the fettered economy, which is an odd word, but since it seems to me that we're all actually fettered to that economy, but the third outside economy, the least important from a human point of view was, of course, the transnational corporate sector. Now, Hilkka presented this diagram to a UN Women's Conference in 1986 already. It's interesting because since she developed this, of course, we've had the rise of neoliberalism, which was just starting off when she in the 80s. And so we're seeing the two external economies fusing with the rise of public-private sector enterprises for almost every conceivable delivery, including universities these days. So I want to say that feminists have, and socialist feminists have been theorizing the reproductive sector for a long, long time. In fact, is it 4 decades? But it has fallen on deaf ears. And it's only just recently there's been a sudden discovery among a new generation of women of reproductive social or Marxism. So hopefully this will grow and there will be some kind of paradigm shifting going on in the standard socialist analysis. So what about decoloniality? Indigenous movements. Well, again, socialism has tended to be, and Marx, of course, was a man of his time, it has tended to be somewhat Eurocentric in its constructs and certainly economistic. And so the colonial movement is not well served by Marxism. It's not sufficiently served. Definitely, it's well served in as much as the economic injustice and the appropriation of resources from the global south, of course. But in terms of respecting the cultures, different cultures, the cultural autonomy of other peoples, we need a deeper analysis. We actually need a civilization analysis. We need a reflexive analysis that is looking into how was this Eurocentric culture formed and what is it that keeps it going. And some of this work was done in our book Pluriverse, which came out a couple of years ago, and I think co-editor Ashish Kothari talked about that in last week's session. And the important thing here is that other peoples, other cultures have other values, not necessarily economistic, they're much more life-affirming values, and other kinds of labor, other ontologies, in fact. So we need a deeper civilizational analysis to resituate socialism and coloniality and reposition them with feminism. So how do we go about this? Well, political economy and sociology, 2 disciplines I'm quite familiar with, don't really have the tools to help explain the patriarchal aspect of these 2 other political movements. But Freud actually offers a concept which we can probably put to good political use. I know he's not always very popular among radicals, but the concept is dissociation. So Freud had a set of defense mechanisms which were all based on projection and dissociation and projection. And I'm going to visit the one where which is involved in the setting up of a patriarchal culture, which Freud described as the Oedipal process. And in the Oedipal process, it was a little bit fanciful. He said, in order for a man to become a full-blown member of a patriarchal society, he has to contest his father. He has to sort of symbolically kill his father and then absorb his father's values. And in that way, he becomes socialized, he becomes a full member of the patriarchal culture. Now, Freud, like Marx, a man of his time, didn't really factor in the woman question very well. But feminist psychologists have, and we can look at they have given a lot of attention to the boy's relation to the mother. And in fact, there is a prior moment which has to be completed in the development of each individual male before he becomes a fully fledged patriarchal subject, which is mother killing, dissociation from the mother, his splitting away. So this occurs as a sort of foundational for the Oedipal moment. It's not literally killing, but it's a dissociation from the the woman, the mother, and all she represents. In Australia, we have a very famous feminist called which introduces the notion of the Madonna or the whore, that the splitting in the patriarchal mind of the woman she is represented in this dualism of Madonna on the one hand, a whore on the other. But that's an aside. The important thing is that the dissociation remains unconscious. There's a projection of the split outwards, and the projection is what creates this very strange culture where men and women are set up as two dualistic opposites, where humanity and nature are set up as dualistic opposites, where women, where white people versus black, you get a set of dualisms. So in this pre-conscious imaginary of the Eurocentric culture, it unfolds as dualisms. Man over woman, and each of the first terms is prioritized and valued, and each of the second is rendered as an object. So man over woman, humanity over nature, white over black, for example, to choose a shortcut, or north over south, subject over object, production over reproduction, and so on and so on. And you'll find, if you look in Eurocentric culture, this dualism penetrates economics, law, religion, and so forth. Mary Mellor, who's a UK ecofeminist, made a very useful little analysis of the economic system, which you can find in this book, by the way, a book we brought out, Feminist Political Ecology, where she unpacks the dualisms and contrasts the male economy, which is based on intellectual labor, market value, versus the reproductive economy, which is generally subsistence or embodied caregiving and so forth. So Mellor really develops that dualism, which again is very important in trying to penetrate the lack of sex-gender reflexivity in socialist thinking and in some thinking about colonization too. So it's, in a sense, the pre-conscious imaginary of Eurocentrism creates a separate ontology, a separate reality for the others. We should, perhaps I should, I have another image we'll use it. We'll use it now. Michelle, have a look at the other image, the second image. So this is, if you like, an X-ray of the great chain of othering. Okay, so it comes through from the monotheistic religions, and you see the unfolding of stratum, and you see that the valued, well, you can move the line of dissociation up or down, but I've actually put workers and socialism in with the capitalist economy because in a sense they're interlocked and dependent on it, even though of course they're attempting to humanize and rectify. The line across the middle is represents a line of dissociation, and above that is the sphere of humanity, reason, production, rights, and below the dissociation is what is othered as less valuable, the sphere of nature, disorder, reproduction, resources. And the people who are in that sector, we find peasants, indigenous, the colonized peoples, and the women, and then children, and then animals, and so forth, all described as closer to nature. So just to amplify a little bit different ontology. I now go over to Vandana Shiva, who is a decolonial feminist. We can take that one away, I think, for now, who describes the ontology which is tacit in the labor of Indian women farm workers. And it's actually a perfect circular economy, a synergistic economy. And I just read you a little phrase from Vandana. Because the important thing about the ontology is that it creates an epistemology. It creates a way of understanding the world. And these Indian women, forest dwellers, have a perfect synergistic epistemology. It's in managing the integrity of ecological cycles in forestry and agriculture that women's productivity has been most developed and evolved. Women transfer fertility from the forest to the fields and to animals. They transfer animal waste as fertilizer for crops and crop byproducts to animals as fodder. They work with the forest to bring water to their fields and families. This partnership between women's work and nature's work ensures the sustainability of sustenance. And in another book, which I did much earlier, Ecofeminism as Politics, there's actually an analysis of how domestic labor likewise uses a circular reproductive understanding, a synergistic economy. I call this kind of work, this kind of labor, as distinct from productive labor, I call this reproductive labor meta-industrial. And the reason it's meta is it's because it's outside and beyond the productivist system. In fact, meta-industrial labor maintains the infrastructure, the metabolic infrastructure, the material infrastructure, which the capitalist system relies on, whether it's in the domestic sector, where women are producing the next generation of labor force, or whether it's in colonial farming, whereas we know 80% of the world's food is produced by peasant women. And we know that, I think it's something like 60% of the world's bioresources are cared for by Indigenous peoples. Looking at this kind of labor, and I guess this is where I have to confess I did study psychology before I was a sociologist, I have distilled the cognitive characteristics of this way of working, which I believe is something we need to understand if we are going to create synergistic economies. So I give you, I think there are 10 principles, and if you don't mind, I will list them because I really want people to understand how it is that humans can live with respect for that ecosystem which we're embedded in. So first of all is the consumption footprint is small because local resources are used and monitored daily with care. Closed loop production is the norm. So just think of your peasant. Scale maximizes responsiveness to matter energy transfers in nature, so avoiding disorganization and entropy. Judgment is built up by trial and error, using a cradle-to-grave assessment of ecosystem health. Meta-industrial labor is intrinsically precautionary. We don't need a precautionary principle, it's built in because it's situated in an intergenerational time frame. You know, Indigenous people, 7 generations thinking. Lines of responsibility are transparent, far from the confusion of small decisions that impairs corporate and bureaucratic economies. Where social organisation is less convoluted than in urban centres.
Ariel, can you hear me? I'm so sorry to interrupt. Noam has had significant trouble getting on to the system, and he's now here. He has to leave us in 15 minutes for another event. I, as a feminist, feel horrified to interrupt you in your talk. I'm curious to know how long you've got to wrap up.
Oh, how long have I got? I can wrap up pretty quickly. I can wrap up in 3 minutes.
Let's do that, because I do not like to interrupt a speaker once moving, but we're very excited that Noam has been able to join us for the last moments of time before he joins his other event. Thanks, Ariel.
Okay. Regenerative work reconciles timescales of humans and other species. It's an economic rationality that knows the difference between stocks and flows. No more is taken than needed. It's an empowering work process. The labor product is immediately enjoyed or shared. Autonomous local economies imply food and energy sovereignty. And there's no provisioning is not, it's eco-sufficient. It does not externalize costs onto others as debt. So I can wrap up by saying, I think what we need and what socialists need to move towards is an embodied materialism, which recognize our embeddedness in the ecosystem and our embodied ways of knowing. And there was really only one other important thing that I wanted to go through, which we could actually revisit after Noam has spoken.
Absolutely, Ariel. We've got some time at the end to get back to you.
We can come back. I just wanted to wrap up by pointing out that we live in a system of multiple debts. I have actually a system of 6 debts, which represent each of the political movements and the appropriation from them and how they need to organize their struggle in a way that synthesizes their objects. Okay, take it away.
Ariel, thank you so much. And there's a long list of comments and compliments. People have been really thrilled to hear your talk. Don't panic. We're going to come back to Ariel as soon as we've heard from Noam, and then we'll pick up with Gar. So thank you so much, Ariel. And if you are able to read the comments and chats, you'll be able to see some of the questions. I'm now very delighted to introduce Noam Chomsky. Noam, we're very sorry if you had technical issues joining. If you can unmute, I'm trying to do it as the central omnipotent controller. There we are. We are delighted that you could join us. We're sorry that you've had any inconvenience. We might hand straight over to you, Noam, to join us here in Australia and beyond to talk about your topic, imagining the future if we have one. Welcome, Noam.
Well, apologies for the addendum, if there is one, but unfortunately, it's necessary. There are very good reasons why the doomsday clock abandoned minutes, switched to seconds, 100 seconds to midnight, and by next January, it'll probably move closer. Well, there's no reason, no need to rehearse the reasons in any detail. You're all familiar with them. Environmental destruction, advancing inexorably towards irreversible tipping points, advanced weapon systems, provocative actions that enhance the grim and growing threat of nuclear war, possibility of pandemics, of unforeseen lethality, and all of this in a setting of the collapse of the social order and collapse of an atmosphere of civilized and rational discourse. Not a good omen for the future, though we have to keep in mind that feasible solutions are known for all of the crises we face. And there are shafts of sunlight penetrating the clouds. Well, let me say a word about feasible solutions. There are questions of timescale. A strong case can be made that capitalist autocracy, apart from its cruel effects, is a suicide pact, is general consciousness about it, and also to follow Bakunin's good advice to create the germs of a more just society within the present one. but the relevant timescale for overcoming current existential crises is far shorter. In fact, it's now. The recent IPCC report made it crystal clear, if it wasn't before, that sharp and steady reduction of fossil fuel use must begin now. The provocative actions that enhance the threat of nuclear war, the development of dangerous weapon systems that can blow us up at any moment, as has come all too close in the past, that's now. The steps to prevent future, possibly more severe pandemics have to be taken now. In all these cases, there are feasible solutions which can and must be enacted now, or the important questions about creating a better society simply don't arise. Well, let's assume the best and ask, what kind of future can we hope for? It's worth remembering that the record of prediction is not stellar, even by the finest and most informed minds. So a century ago, John Maynard Keynes confidently predicted that by today, the great problem we would face would be too much leisure. What he called the old Adam in us would be at a loss how to spend the day, since we'd be so immersed in material luxury. Didn't quite come to pass. What we see is something more like John Kenneth Galbraith's world of private affluence and public squalor, and during the neoliberal years, vast affluence for very few and a precarious existence for most of the rest. That's in the more privileged sectors of the world. Look beyond, it's much different. As today, we got a report of 1 billion people in the world who don't have shoes and are subject to serious diseases constantly. Providing them with shoes would be a rounding error in national budgets, but we're not civilized enough to go that far. Well, we should certainly be able to do much better than that. We might even aspire to the goals of earlier days, when a large part of the population was thinking hard about designing a better future, with leading ideas that we would do well to grasp and to carry forward. One such period was mid-20th century. The Great Depression, the hideous war, unleashed a wave of radical democracy throughout the world, taking many forms. No time here to run through the reaction of those holding the whip. In brief, the radical democratic wave was beaten back by the war's victors, often with considerable violence, setting the stage for the contemporary age. That's not the usual picture of the post-war world, but it's a pretty accurate approximation. That's one torch that we can pick up. There was an earlier and similar period, one with much unfulfilled promise. That's the late 19th century, during the onset of the Industrial Revolution and the emergence of labor organization and agrarian populism, not what's called populism today. This was a radical popular movement of farmers in the United States, in a mostly agricultural country, sweeping through Texas, Midwest, and beyond. Their goal was to create a cooperative commonwealth based on mutual aid, in which farmers would create their own self-managed institutions and would free themselves of the oppressive rule of Northeastern bankers and market managers. They began to link up with the rising labor movement, the Knights of Labor, which had a similar vision. The slogan of the Knights was that those who work in the mills should own them. There was a lively worker press, labor press, run by workers in the newly emerging industries, among them the so-called factory girls, young women from the farms, driven to the mills. Very eloquent, significant press with quite interesting ideas. They envisioned a neo-republican world in which there would be no masters, no dominance, no wage slavery. That was then the standard term for having a job. That is, spending most of one's waking life in near total subordination to someone else's will. It was regarded as the ultimate assault on human dignity, according to ideas that reigned from classical Greece and Rome on through the early Industrial Revolution, beaten down by intense indoctrination, but I think they're simmering not far below the surface. Abraham Lincoln expressed the common view by describing wage slavery as tolerable only as a temporary path to freedom. For him, that meant individual freedom, but for industrial workers and farmers, it meant the cooperative commonwealth based on worker-owned, self-managed enterprises, industrial and agricultural. These initiatives achieved many successes, but they were beaten down by substantial violence, state and private, culminated in Woodrow Wilson's Red Scare that crushed the labor movement. It rose again in the 1930s. It may well again, maybe reviving ideas that should inspire us in undertaking the tasks ahead, ideas and actions that have to be adapted to a world that's greatly changed, though the basic goals remain vibrant and the barriers to attaining them have more than a little ring of familiarity. That, I think, is the kind of future we should not only imagine, but work to create, as fortunately is already being done, and that we can join to carry forward. I think that's the task for the future, if there is one. And I'm afraid I have to leave you because I have another talk starting in 2 minutes.
Thank you so much, Noam. And again, our apologies for whatever technical mysteries occurred. We're very grateful to you for sharing a little bit of time with us. And what we might do with your busy schedule, though, is invite you to come back and we'll test all the tech beforehand. So perhaps everyone's saying thank you on the webinar. We'll give a big Aussie clap from down under. Thank you so much, Noam. We'll talk to you again soon, I hope. Oh, what a fun morning on Zoom. Okay, it appears that Gar has been a coming and going. We've shot him a note. I really hope that will go okay. But in the meantime, what's exciting is that everyone's asking for more of Ariel. And that's not just me saying that because of the technical glitches. Ariel, we would like to hand back to you in all of your glory, including your eco-feminist glory. What I might do, though, to kick you off is to kick you off. Sorry, it's terrible. I'm going to kick you off. We've got a bunch of questions. So I might actually start with a couple of them. There's a lot of folks giving really powerful feedback, saying how much they've appreciated your frameworks. And before I forget, a number of folks would love to be pointed to a list of references or any of the materials you've talked about. I know that you're prolific in your writing and output, but if you've got anything you'd like NENA to share, that would be good. So let me start with questions. Folks, if you've been putting your questions in the chat, please write them in the Q&A. It's the best way for us to stay focused. And first, although I want to go to Hamed, I know that he has a question for you. Oh, let's wait for Ariel to return. It's all happening here today, ladies and gentlemen. Nothing more exciting than there we are. Ariel, you're on mute. If you'd like to unmute yourself again, then we'll kick off with the discussion with you.
Okay. And listen, before we go any further, please can I will you note, people note, that my surname, Salleh, is an Asian name. It's a Muslim name, actually, which I acquired through misadventure once when I was very young. And so it's the same pronunciation in the South Pacific Islands as well. Salleh, okay.
Salleh.
Ariel.
I am famous for
Ariel.
everything. So I apologize profusely. I've mispronounced it.
Oh, that's all right.
I'm egalitarian in my mispronunciation.
Yeah, the more international we become, the more people will be used to these strange names.
Oh, look, darling, it's not strange. I have even been famously, saying words correctly. Oh, yeah, there's no rhyme or reason. Anyway, enough of me. So if you're happy to have some questions, here's a question from Wayne. Should we be trying to incorporate issues of ecology, gender, race, sexual orientation, and Eurocentric colonization into a Marxist class analysis, or is this futile?
Well, I think Marxism is one of the ingredients of the recipe, which I thought I had more or less said that. I think we need to understand each movement has its own history and its own objectives and its own beauty and value, and understanding from the point of view of a sociology of knowledge that the social context of an idea system, of a belief system, is always going to be very influential on it. And a lot of that is historical accident. So as I said, Marx was a man of his time, but he has bequeathed us invaluable constructs for understanding capitalism. There's no doubt about it. It's just not enough. It's just part of probably at least 6 other models that we need to bring together and to integrate. And of course, integrating, that's what I've been possessed by, is how do you integrate these things? So I've made a few suggestions this morning, but it can be a lifetime effort.
Indeed. And I'm sorry, I'm going to go back to Hamed, who does have a question for you. Hamed, and you're on mute. Yes, thank you.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. We thought that we can do a little bit of a favorism because we're co-hosting and we have very passionate students and graduates that they have already sent us some questions. So I'm just picking up on one from Maria Wozenes-Skia, our university medalist and graduate. And that question is for Ariel. She is asking Ariel, how essential is it to name patriarchy as the foundation of the wicked problems we are facing today? Is it possible to create a real alternative to any of today's problems without keeping patriarchy in focus, with all of its complexity and all of the links between seemingly separate problems?
Well, the solution is already there. And when I was winding down and describing what I see as the epistemology of meta-industrial labor, it already exists. It is not developed by any patriarchal authority. It emerges from the caregiving labors of indigenous gatherers, of peasants, of mothers and grandmothers. As I said, you can read about more in the Eco-Sufficiency book. Now, the reason I mention Marx is because we had a seminar with socialist thinkers, and also because the situation of workers is an extremely important part of how we move forward. And the reason I mentioned Freud is simply because he does offer some tools which are not available anywhere else. But it's like once you have made your way to the rooftop, you can throw the ladder away, if you get my drift.
Thank you. Lovely. I've got a question here from Bronwyn Morgan. Hi, Bronwyn. Thank you for such an interesting inquiry. If the chain of disassociations you describe is part of a pre-conscious imaginary, how can it be consciously reshaped?
Well, that's right. That's what feminists, that's a technology feminists started in the 60s called consciousness raising, where people sit around, men and women, and the men were doing their own consciousness raising in groups, the women we were doing ours, and we're exploring how our sex gender identities are created and what are the social implications of these and the political implications of these. So for fear of mentioning another academic term, I don't want to be accused of patriarchal academicism, but we call it reflexivity. In other words, having a capacity to recognize one's embodiment in the social conditions that you live in and how these are affecting you, how they're shaping you. So maybe that helps.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. I'm just citing that Gar has actually joined us, and I'll just see, Gar, can you hear us? You should be able to show your video and join our discussion. He's dropped off again. Oh dear, I don't know what's happening. Oh, no. Please bear with us, ladies and gentlemen. This is all very...
Can you hear me?
Hello, yes, we can hear you. You should be able to show your video now too.
Can you am I there?
Yes, we can see you. Can you see us?
I can see you, yes.
Wonderful. Hello and welcome. I do hope you haven't had too many troubles joining us today.
Just a bit, but here I am. Sorry to be late.
Yeah, it's very strange. No, it doesn't sound like it's your problem. Anyway, welcome, and we're delighted that you could join us. We have Ariel still here with us. And what we might do, Gar, is turn to you to give your talk and then have further questions for both you and Ariel. Would that be okay?
Yes, indeed. Has Noam joined us, or is he also?
He joined and left again. We had changed the times, as you know, and then he had some technical difficulties and we had to send the Zoom link to a different email address because he was having trouble. So I'm sorry that you've missed him.
Okay. So
but if it's okay with you, Ariel, we'll turn to Gar and come back in this delightful...
What would you like me to do? Because I'm interrupting you right in the middle. What would
thankfully, Ariel was interrupted earlier than you, but now she's been wonderful, gracious, answering a lot of questions. So we're delighted to have you give your talk. And we're basically picking up where we would have been with both of you then available for questions and discussion together. So if that's okay, we're happy to.
Okay. Well, I don't have a formal talk to give, but when I think about these questions of quality of life in the next society, from the new society, I think that the relationships of one-to-one of individuals on the basis of equality and community and liberty, those three dimensions are critical. So they are very demanding dimensions for a systemic design, which is how I think about them. What would be the nature of a political economic system that we might aspire to, which would actually manifest one-to-one equality, actual liberty, and sufficient time to explore creativity? So those are very, very demanding. And I ask that, I think the way I come to that is that one would have to begin, and we are talking about this and experimenting with it in several places, both here and in the United States, in experiments, and in Great Britain, starting with one community. And if you can't do it in one community, you probably can't do it in a system in this country of 340 million people, in your country, smaller by numbers, but equal in size. How would you do it? We begin with some designs that assume some common ownership of wealth, but not entirely common ownership, because that would be the only way to allocate time for individuals equally, that you would have to distribute time and work in some way. Now that means you could include cooperatives, individual entrepreneurs, et cetera, but the design would have to allow for some equality of time and work. That's one. And also security of individuals. So again, those are very demanding requirements for a system. But with the advanced technologies in the advanced countries, you could reduce the work time to at least half the time now if we redistributed income. So people working 4 hours a day would be well within the parameters of the American and Australian economies if there were changes in distribution. So what opens the space in the good society is the productivity of the system that allows for extraordinary amounts of time. And with that time, security. Now the possibility is given by the economic and technological availability to develop a systemic design that would actually manifest freedom, equality, liberty, ecological sustainability, and community. Very, very demanding requirements, would require starting in one community, probably think of a community of 100,000 or neighborhoods of substantial size within a metropolitan area, in which the work week was cut down radically to 20 hours, and which individuals were allowed to develop neighborhoods and communities and we're doing much experimentation here in Great Britain with common ownership of facilities, cooperatives, but also what are called community corporations or neighborhood corporations in Cleveland and the United States and Preston, nonprofit corporations that benefit the entire community. In some cases, it could be municipal or municipal substructures, as in neighborhoods, so that there is participatory control over productive enterprise and opening up much greater free time. That's the hardest thing to grasp, that the productivity of the advanced economies is so great that freedom of time is available if we could redistribute time and the production of wealth. The second one, obviously, is ecological sustainability. And that's a very, very demanding requirement, because to do that well requires the constraints on how production goes on. And all of the advanced systems have struggled with ways to regulate the economy so as to produce environmental sustainability. Nonetheless, we can imagine how that might be done in a more cooperatively owned system and society. Within that frame of stability, guaranteed stability, greater equality, and personal security, we are in a position that you could begin to realize what are the real conditions of freedom and equality. Almost the theories that the Marxist theories of freedom only begins when there is freedom from work. That is to say, one is no longer constrained by the requirement to work 8 or 10 hours a day, but if you could reallocate time because of the productivity and because of the distribution of the economic product in a different way, you're in a situation where, and none of us have ever lived in such a situation, where we're no longer constrained by what has driven humankind since the beginning, the necessity to work in order to provide shelter, food, and sustenance. We are at that point in terms of productivity possibilities. And now that's very different from the distribution of those possibilities, but you can imagine what might be if we were to distribute the wealth and income and time, most of all time, so that you could open the space for community. And in that context, ecological sustainability. Those are all within the constraints of the current productive possibilities. Now, to say that is very different from realizing that. And we've been looking at it, working with experiments in this country and in Great Britain, and a couple other places, where people are beginning to develop community corporations, cooperatives, municipal-owned structures, neighborhood-owned structures, all with a view to creating the preliminary infrastructure of an economy in common, and learning how to do that on the way forward. At one level. At the other level, the work we've done here at the Democracy Collaborative is try to encourage a broad-ranging theoretical debate on what we call the next system. If the corporate capitalist systems that are failing in many ways to achieve these conditions, if the welfare state is very positive, but only in minimal in terms of what we now think of as the future possibilities, and if state socialism has failed, what theoretically even would be the design of the next system? And if you go to our website, the Next System Project, you'll find a debate that many leading academics have joined in with a full-ranging theoretical debate. We've published a book by my colleague Gus Speth, collecting many of the essays towards the next system on the design that might be emergent from the current systems, which would lay foundations for where we're going over the next period of the next 50 years, century, given the wonderful possibilities that advanced technologies offer. How do we manifest a good society? So that's a sketch. The next discussion is a 10-hour lecture, but I won't go into that now. Perhaps this is enough to open the discussion.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you for persevering. Before we, I'm just seeing the questions that have been coming in. I'll try to pluck out one or two. Here's one from Anouk. Thank you, Gar. With exponential weapons technology, a society that makes key decisions through conflict or battle is suicidal. How do you see the social media landscape impacting the ability of people to conceive of a society for the common good, instead of trusting the myth of the invisible hand and the market?
Well, I think our technologies now allow a great deal of participatory democracy, that old slogan, could be and is facilitated and can be increasingly facilitated by the technologies we now have available for participation in neighborhoods, in cities, in state discussions, in broader continental country discussions. We haven't even tapped the possibilities of the technology, but the process, I think, inevitably begins at the bottom and has to grow up from. I often put it this way: if you can't do it in one neighborhood, you probably can't do it in the system. Learning participation, and the place to start is to call some neighbors in for some tea or drinks, and say, what could we do starting right here, and then work your way out. But I think that's inevitably the key question. If there's participatory democracy and systemically valid, it begins very, very, very locally. And that is the foundation of building upward to larger systems.
Thank you.
And we see a lot of experimentation of that kind. If you go to our websites, there's an enormous amount going on in many countries.
Yes. Gar, there's another question here asking, does your analysis assume affordable energy and general resources? I have to admit, I'm convinced, given the limits to growth, particularly limits to affordable and available energy.
I'm sorry, maybe could you focus that a little bit more? I wasn't quite sure how the last.
Yeah, the question is about, does your analysis assume affordable energy and general resources? This person has said, I'm not convinced, given there are limits to the affordability of available energy. I think that's the question.
I believe that the technologies are available, although the living standards may not grow as, if we want to have a greater equality, the growth of actual material standards for everyone will not be, I think, what the highest percentages in the advanced systems are having. So yes, the answer is yes, but it has certain constraints as to the degree of equality, and also time of production, how many hours people spend working. I think that is possible, yes.
Thank you. There's a nice quick question, which I had thought of too as you were talking. What are your thoughts about a universal basic income?
Well, I'm definitely for such a stepping stone towards the good society. It's a way to release time, and time is, and put it another way, time is the key foundation of liberty. That most people don't, they think of liberty in terms of political liberty. but most people don't have liberty of time. And without liberty of time, you don't have actual freedom to do as you would like to do freely.
Yeah, thank you. I might just turn now to a question that actually crosses over into the work of Ariel as well. Wayne has asked, to you, Gar, does a class-based analysis have any role in a new society that recognizes ecofeminism?
Well, the goal is a less society with ecofeminist criteria as well. But that's a very demanding goal, which I certainly aspire to. But you must assume that, at least I assume, that the overall target is full equality and ecological sustainability. And that includes male and female as well. And that's very demanding, but that is, I think, the target over time. I think the requirement of that target is community, which is kind of a necessary constraint, but people often don't bring that into the picture, and I think it's very important to understand that piece.
Ariel and Gar, we've got a couple of questions for each of you, but what I'd like to do is ask a question to both of you, a rather selfish inspired question actually. You may be aware that myself and Hamed and many others on this call are connected to the New Economy Network Australia, or NENA. It's a civil society network with thousands and thousands of people, many hundreds of paid up members as a co-op. And we're currently working on a civil society strategy for this well-being economy. We were just wondering, perhaps we'll come to Gar first and then Ariel to you. What thoughts do you have in your extensive knowledge and research and experiences? What do you think civil society networks right now should be either focusing on or learning from or not doing? Your general advice in terms of practicalities. Yeah, please go for gold.
Well, it depends what the term civil society networks include. But if it's a very expansive concept, we have been working with networks that also are undertaking experiments in community, new forms of economic development at every range. That is, the New Economy Coalition is part of this in the United States. There's a whole network of people developing cooperatives, municipal enterprise, worker-owned companies, new forms of economic reducing hours. So that's part and parcel of the strictly political and strictly ecological pieces of the puzzle. But bringing those three pieces together, there are a number of their experiments are really wonderful at this point in time in many countries, and certainly we're seeing, and I think you are as well. But beginning to understand those not simply as value propositions or political propositions or organizing propositions, but elements of the creation of the criteria of the design of the next society. Systemic design.
Yes.
Asking the question of how do we design which would manifest as a normal outcome of the way it functions, these values that are beginning to emerge in civil society. That's the next stage, in my view, of asking the systemic question, which is what the Next System project that we've launched from with a number of academics and activists in the United States and some other countries as well, Great Britain.
Yeah, we've been very keen to observe and learn from the Next System project. It's awesome. Thank you for that response, Gar. Ariel, do you have thoughts to share with those of us who are doing the building blocks of all this?
I think the first thing, like the step one really, is that for us, in order to act locally, we have to learn how to think globally. And if you wouldn't mind putting up that great chain triangle diagram again, I could actually just do two things at the same time. I'll finish off what I was wanting to say. And
yeah, please. I'm just fiddling with my buttons again.
Yeah. Okay. So at the moment, wherever we are situated in this global hierarchy. People tend to have their horizon and their vision, their political vision, limited by where they are, which stratum they're in. And I think we can't move forward until we're able to embrace the reality of each grouping, which is kind of what I mean by reflexivity in a way. And I want to relate that to the question of debts, because usually when activists are talking about debts, they're talking about economic debts. But I think the debts that are being accrued in the world, and they're being accrued at every level of this chain of being, are also thermodynamic. They're material, they're energetic. And that's not just in nature, that's in human beings as well. So I've been talking about organizing, and I think a meta-industrial village way of life, the Swaraj, the buen vivir, the subsistence perspective, as some of the feminists call it, does reach for this. But as things stand, there are 6 debts. There's the obvious debt, which Marxists have been talking about, how workers are never fully paid for the labor time they put in. So I call that a social debt. There's a livelihood debt, which is owed to peasants and indigenous peoples for taking their land and livelihoods away by capitalist appropriation, colonization. There's an embodied debt owed to women, not only for birthing the next generation, for the unpaid caregiving they give, for their sexual services, for their work in community and so forth. There's a generational debt, which is owed to young people for expecting them, for displacing the costs of our way of life onto their backs and expecting them to move into living in a planet which is disintegrating and carrying responsibility for that. And there's a species debt that we owe to other species for taking them for granted, for predating them, for resourcing them. And then there's finally the ecological debt, which is owed to the planetary systems at large, nature at large, which is breaking down, which is what the whole climate crisis is about, and the biodiversity crisis and so forth. So when we think about these debts, economists approach it, and often Marxists too, approach them in terms of dollar value and reparations. But what we need to understand is, because humans are nature in embodied form, we carry that debt in a thermodynamic sense. We carry it in our bodies, and each of those debts is an extraction of life energy from each of those groupings. So I think it's really critical that we are able to conceptualize this before we start planning utopias for this, that, and whatever. The other thing I would have to say is I am very skeptical that a high technology society is going to be compatible with a healthy planet. And I don't think enough attention has been given to that.
May I stop sharing the screen, Ariel?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, finished, yes.
Thank you. That was wonderful. And there were actually many, many questions about your 6 debts. I think we left people on the hook and they were waiting for you to get back to it. So thank you for that. Another question for both of you, which I'll reframe a little. Veda has asked, what types of steps could we as young people take to try and integrate all of this good advice into our lives and to support change? I'm sure all of us who are a little bit older in the tooth are very worried for our younger folks. So Gar and Ariel, if you've got thoughts to share, perhaps now is a good time.
Well, for me, I think the answer is the same to the previous question. It's building that awareness. It's finding identification with all these other groups and then deciding how politically we move forward. Because, yeah. Actually, there's a lovely comment, sorry, Gar, saying we need to mentor and support our young people. And I couldn't support that more. All of us who've done anything or worked in any space must to mentor, support, train, back up and offer support to those leading now. So that's just a little 2 cents worth. Sorry, Gar, over to you.
No, I certainly agree with that. but what the thing I might add, which is pretty obvious, there are just myriad number of experiments going on in many countries, I'm sure in yours as well. Here in the United States and Great Britain, which I know best, but also if you go to our Next System project websites, we try to cover a lot of this. There are people working on worker-owned companies and cooperative-owned companies and municipal-owned companies, neighborhood development schemes, and environmentally building from the bottom up, all sorts of environmental experimentation. It is a very, very rich period of development experimentally, so that there's lots to learn and lots that can be done by people in any community. And simultaneously, there's a great theoretical debate about the good society and the next society, not simply in abstract terms, but very, very serious theoretical terms of how do you actually organize advanced systems that might permit and flourish and provide the foundations for ecological sustainability, equality, democracy, community. Community is a very difficult challenge given the uncertainties of the economy that keep uprooting people. How do you actually work through the theoretical problems as well as the practical problems? But there is a far-ranging debate and a great deal of experimentation, and I'm sure in your country as well, but we're seeing it here and in Great Britain at a great level. The Next System Project website and the Democracy Collaborative websites try to compile some of this, and a book by my colleague Gus Speth is called The New Systems Reader. It brings a lot of it together, encouraging debate as well as experimentation.
Wonderful.
Can I just say that
Please.
I don't think it is a matter of inventing another system. I think the system is there, and it's already being demonstrated by people who have not been contaminated by the productivist capitalist, colonial capitalist system, patriarchal imperium, whatever you want to call it. It's the principles of meta-industrial labor, which I did outline earlier, and I realize they are rather abstract. I already show, I believe, how we can live, how people are already living in synergy with the ecosystem. They're already provisioning themselves without creating debt onto others. So it's our culture, it's our high-powered capitalist industrial system that has to be examined. The model is there, the other model is there. This society has taken the wrong route. Sorry, I feel very passionate about this.
Well, I certainly agree with the criticism of capitalism and of state socialism. But I do think, and we would have a long discussion about this, that as organizing as the advanced technologies of a large continental system, I think is not that, I would think it's more complicated than what, but I haven't heard your whole discussion than that. I think it takes us to how do you actually organize if you get away from very low level, low tech and small scale development. If you get away from that, how do you organize a political economy for equality, ecological sustainability, community, and liberty? Those are very, very demanding constraints once you get beyond low technologies. So we would have a serious discussion about that. I suspect that from what we obviously have only begun on that.
I tell you, Gar, I think it's a boy thing.
What's that?
I think it's a boy thing.
The technology.
Because I can see how they're nodding up there when you're speaking. So you know, there's two of you on it.
Oh, no. That is, so I think what we might do is invite you both back for a longer discussion around that. If that suits you.
My Zoom just went out. Did my sound go out? My Zoom went out.
I don't know if you heard, but Ariel, he thinks it's a boy thing.
Yes, I heard her say that. And let me say this, I'm chuckling at her comment. That's a different era of comment that we're no longer using that right now in the States.
I've got two more questions before we officially wrap up, if that's okay. One is a really very thoughtful question from Nick Rose. Hi, Nick. And I might just jump to the end because it's a long question and we're just about out of time. So it would seem that the prospects for progressive change, given all the things that are going on, particularly in the US and even in Australia, the current political context, really forging these huge splits in society around the pandemic and other things. But the question is, if the US ceases to exist as a global imperial power, would that advance the prospects for socialism in the 21st century or a cooperative commonwealth? I'll put it to you first, Gar, but would love your thoughts too, Ariel.
From my point of view, the answer is definitely yes. I mean, I've spent half of my research career on how do you deal with one or another form of direct, or explicit or implicit imperialism and corporate capitalism. I think both of those are a block to the kind of systems that we're talking about, or the design, the buildup of the next society. So because they resist or undermine the directions that we're speaking about. That's the short answer. The long answer is, how do you build to and through the difficulties of a transition? Very, very complicated and a tricky business, but I think beyond us in the next decades.
Thank you, Gar. Ariel, do you have any comments on that question?
Look, Michelle, can you just recap the question? Sorry.
I think the question is, there was an assumption that the kind of difficulties that are being experienced within many Western societies are perhaps exacerbated in the US with these extreme splits between the left, right, or whatever. If the US stops being the global imperial power and starts to disintegrate in different ways, would that make it easier for socialism to be, I guess, moving forward in the 21st century, or cooperative commonwealths? It's a big one. It's a great question.
At the end of the day, I come back to the military-industrial complex. I am very pessimistic about all of our wonderful ideas, because we are so easily annihilated if we step out of line. I was reading last night an eco-socialist blog where I see that the US Green New Deal, the Democratic Socialists of America have got a Green New Deal restructure going on. They're thinking in that. And I understand the eco-socialist strand has joined with them, which grows that a little bit. But then I think, but then you've got the Democratic Party, which is extremely centrist and mainstream, and you have this. I just see the possibility of change as very difficult and very uphill in the United States. I'm probably not answering your question, but yeah.
Okay, thank you. And look, all of these questions are obviously very deep, and we need more time for all of them. I would like to put to you, Ariel, a question from Elliot. Why do you think that a high-tech future is incompatible with a healthy environment?
Well, we've got climate change. Is that enough?
Perhaps not for this particular question. Why do you personally think that? Because many people think the solution to climate change is more technological fixes. So perhaps could you articulate for those?
They do, and they would, wouldn't they? I mean, in a capitalist society, anything which can be cooked up to make a render a profit will be put forward, and that I find the whole strand of ecological modernization in green thinking and in liberal thinking very naive. They just have not done their homework. They do not do cradle to grave cost assessments right back to the very origination of the mining, the transport, the manufacture, the transport, the marketing, the transport, the consumption, the transport, the waste. I mean, people don't think. A lot of people are not thinking through. They're not thinking it through.
And I think I agree. And there's also a lot of absence of appropriate information in the public space. People are not aware of the consumption and production aspects of our life. That's what I did my own PhD on. And even books like Confronting Consumption remind people that a lot of the fixes, even from those with the best intentions, are still trying to solve things after they've been done rather than rethink what we should and shouldn't do. So again,
And
rich
the
conversations.
other thing is people have professional positions, their identity, their status, their income is served by putting forward these particular solutions. The universities are going that way. You know, we have public relations companies which are propagating all kinds of ecological nonsense. It's big.
It is. Thanks, Ariel. And like I said, I would love to invite you. I think Hamed and I would both love to invite you back for some longer discussions. I've got one final question and then a kind of a launch pad for a wrap up around what we can all do next. There's a question here from Amelia Salmon. While we're talking mainly in the community economy space, what are your thoughts of more justice-oriented corporations such as B Corps? Is capitalism changing itself because of the demands of the market? Perhaps Gar, you could go first with this one.
Well, I don't know that capitalism is changing because of the demands of the market, but I do think there's an enormous amount of experimentation emerging. B corporations being a minor one, with an attempt to introduce mainly ecological constraints on production. But what we're seeing here, particularly in the United States and to a certain degree in Great Britain, is enormous experimentation with cooperatives, neighborhood-owned enterprise, community-owned, city-owned enterprise, theoretical development of regional ownership and control, experimentation for ways in which to constrain the development of the system and to make it more ecologically and more equitable, both in terms of income and wealth and in terms of gender. Tremendous amount of theory and experimentation. I take this as a very fertile period in history, and at the same time that the technology is producing the potential for a radical reduction in work time. So I think this is the prehistory of a very important series of changes in the advanced systems. I think I don't think that the way forward is going to be easy, but I think that the conditions are opening up very, very interesting possibilities, both in terms of the technology, production, and experimentation and theory. Both three of those are going forward very radically.
Thank you, Gar. Ariel, did you have any comments on that?
I'm not optimistic about corporate social responsibility because of the nature of capitalism itself, which requires creative destruction in order to proceed. But I am with Gar on the necessity for regional organization, for cooperatives. The eco-feminist subsistence perspective is very much looking at local production, rural urban interchange, rural urban local markets, and so forth. I would have wrapped up with some points about that because it does look at a way in which we can meet human needs while reproducing nature at the same time and producing community and producing healthy, creative, patient individuals. But I think we've done for the day.
Thank
I
you,
hope
Ariel.
I wasn't misunderstood, Ariel. I certainly think we have to move beyond the capitalist corporation to building from the bottom up towards the community, neighborhood, individual, cooperative, and ultimately the regional and the national public forms as the long haul of the direction. We're transcending the corporate capitalist system if we're talking seriously about change, I think.
Thank you. I think there's a question from Hamed, and then I've got one final wrap-up question, and then we'll come back to Hamed to talk about his survey. But Hamed, did you have a question? And you're on mute there too.
Yes, that is a question again from one of our students at the University of Newcastle. Name is Claire van der Wood, and she's a passionate second-year student in Bachelor of Arts, Human Geography. She's asking you, Gar, and also Ariel, it may now be more important than ever for young people to politically organize, yet human connection is increasingly being filtered through bubbles of social media consumption and propaganda as life is moving online. Is it possible for the transformative movements needed for a just future to develop when a real life organizing is considered at best an inconvenience and at worst a global health threat. And if I can also add something, an element to this, especially for you, Gar, because you've been one of the sources of inspiration for me, these projects that we have here and the courses that we teach alongside Ariel's and Chomsky's work, were very much, when I incorporate your works into my courses, it gives a lot of hope and optimism after a lot of criticism of capitalism. But where is that, relating this to the students' question, where is that the political arm for the next systems project in your language? Is that would the progressive Democrats, for instance, in the case of the United States, are adequate, are they powerful, or we should build up also a much stronger, much more relevant political arm, especially by the young people, for the young people?
Well, I wear two hats, one political economist and historian. And I take the answer to that question that's always seemed best to me, or the most useful answer, that I take from the American feminist movement. And the way that the feminists began organizing in the United States was they'd bring together, call together, and I would apply this across the board to people interested in the economy and environment and other issues, call together a half a dozen or 10 friends, get some pizza and some beer, and begin reading things that are of interest and talking about them, with lots of good literature. My colleague Gus Speth has published a whole series of essays in the New Systems Reader, which collects a lot of different visions, but there's tremendous literature available on the nature of good society, on experiments that are going on at the level of community, neighborhood, worker co-ops, system design, et cetera. That's huge literature. Begin reading and talking and thinking about this literature, and then asking the very simple question of the people who you get together in your living room and say, what could we, this small group, do here in our community to begin moving in the new direction? Now, I think it always ends up with, are we going to do anything? And that question, I think, is critical, but it comes out best if it's informed by really some serious understanding, both of theory, but of practical experimentation that's gone on in different countries around the world. So I'm in that sense, I'm a cautious optimist. I think there's a lot of great energy, a lot of things going on in many movements, but there's also a tremendous amount of good theory of how you actually think about moving in through systemic design, if you like that question, in the next society as we build forward. So I'm in that sense a very cautious optimist about what the available things can be done if people sit down together and say, what could we, this group, do starting now here in our own community?
Thanks, Gar. Ariel, did you have a response to Hamed's?
I know I've spent a lot of time sharing ideas here, but the kind of thrust of that has really been to talk about embodied knowledge, an epistemological shift to understanding ourselves as nature in embodied form. And I would like to emphasize, we can look at Extinction Rebellion, who are doing wonderful stuff, although it's very much symbolic, cultural, symbolic. I would like to promote permaculture, young people going hands-on, working with nature, understanding the systems in a really deep way, or living with communities that are self-sufficient, have self-sufficient livelihoods already developed, in order to get our Western Eurocentric mindset shifted from commoditized solutions, technologized solutions. That's what I would encourage young people to do.
Thank you. And in a way, my final question was going to be, what are the practical things we could do? And you've both kind of answered that. And I really do want to give another plug to the New Economy Network. It literally was 120 people sitting together in a conference in 2016 saying, What can we do together that we're not already doing or that we can't do on our own? What can we do across all of the non-government spaces, non-corporate spaces in Australia? How do we build a network of people sharing with each other, providing access to cool ideas, experimenting, inspiring others to develop their localized and decolonial projects, etc. So for all of you on this call, if you are interested in shifting to the next economy, the better economy, the well-being economy, living within the donut economy, please come and play in the NENA space. This isn't just a plug for a network. We're unfunded. We're run by volunteers. We host gazillions of activities and events. We have hubs that invite anyone to come in, share your knowledge and expertise and learn from others. So if you're feeling like, how can I do something? Definitely take on Gar's advice, have a yarn to your local folks in your local community, and then join up into the NENA space so that you can play with other cool people doing awesome and important things at a time when optimism is desperately required. So that's my plug for the real work, the day-to-day grinding work of connecting and learning and sharing and hopefully doing real projects. So I will in a moment do a huge thank you to Ariel and Gar, and particularly for surviving the technological issues that come with some Zoom calls. Thanks so much, Gar, for your patience, and Ariel for jumping in so flexibly. Everything went pear-shaped at the beginning of the discussion. I am eternally grateful to you.
Hey, Michelle, women are socialized for contingency.
I would agree, I would. Many men are also socialized, but I do think there's something does come from the sheer vagaries of the gene pool. But Hamed, I might say thank you first and then let you talk about the survey. Is that okay? So that our speakers can feel they're off the hook. So on behalf of everybody, and many hundreds of people who've listened today, excuse me, and will be joining the recordings, Ariel and Gar, thank you. It's been a fantastic, rich conversation, and we would very much love to invite you back to have longer discussions, politically, especially about some of the deeper challenges we face as we move towards the next economy, the new space, our new society. So with that, I shall give you a daggy air clap because this is a good thing to do at the end.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Very much.
Thank you so much, Gar. Thank you.
And I'm now going to hand over to Hamed, and Gar and Ariel, if you're busy, please feel free to jump off. We'll be in touch. If you'd like to stay on, then Hamed is just going to run people through a little bit of what's been going on with his project. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Over
much.
to you, Hamed.
Yeah, well, I don't have much to say except inviting people to look at our websites if they want to learn more about our projects, Alternative Futures Research Network, Alternative Futures Research Hub that we have created together with NENA, and also the project that we have, Reimagining Quality of Life, or under the bigger title of the Well Living Lab. And I have also a number of times sent the link to the survey. I'm now wearing my NENA hat. I'm also a member of the Research Hub, NENA Research Hub, and we have designed a survey questionnaire. It's not too long, but because this webinar series is on quality of life, and we are inviting everyone to help us with reimagining. We don't want just to be the only speakers, but we know that we don't have much time. So hopefully these questions, they're not open-ended, unfortunately, not many of them, but at least we know that it may take less time of you if there are multiple choice. So we would like to hear from you as well, and inject your ideas into our debates and conversations, because one of the ultimate goals is to, as I said, create a common platform in which that would be inclusive enough in order to influence policy debates and public debates on quality of life, especially on this very essential topic, I think, in human history. Life, the planetary life, or organized life, as Chomsky says, has never been under such a huge assault from many directions, from climate change, from the pandemics, from the and much even deeper crises like the crisis that we have in terms of the motivations, crisis in aspirations, and and things like that. So we will be very, very thankful to you. In case if you don't have time now to do this, we will send an email, a follow-up with a link to the recording of this that will go on NENA'S YouTube channel, and it would include again that link to the survey. Hopefully we can hear from you. Thank you so much everyone for joining us, and I'm very thankful to Ariel, Gar, and Chomsky for making it. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you so much, Hamed. So just to wrap up, everyone, the link to the survey that Hamed has created for you to get your ideas is in the chat box now. We will include it in follow-up emails. And if you visit the NENA website for many good things, you'll also see a button on the homepage that takes you to the link I shared about this quality of life project that Hamed and his team have been leading and partnering with NENA for. So on that note, thank you so much to everyone who's joined us, and wherever the time zone is that you are, I shall steal a great line from a terrific movie called The Truman Show. Good afternoon, good evening, and good night. And we look forward to seeing you very, very soon again in another NENA event. Thank you again, Ariel, and to everyone for your time. Have a lovely Friday and a very groovy weekend. Thank you, everyone. Bye.